What do you mean?
On Daf Samach Hey on the base, 65b, about a third away from the bottom. Our conversation is about when there are multiple people living in a courtyard or in a flag lot behind a courtyard, and one has the right to walk through the other, and the need to lease from a non-Jew that's living with in this courtyard with minimum of two Jews, according to Rabbi Tzvi Fischer. Reish Lakish v'talmidei Rabbi Chanina iklu lahu pundak. Reish Lakish and his students came to a pundak, which is a courtyard which is a hotel, sort of like a hotel, in a courtyard, together with other Jews that were living there. There are two versions in Rashi as to whether it was sort of like a motel that each individual guest in the hotel can have their own entryway. And besides for that, there was a home for the non-Jew living there, or there were actually different people living there besides for them in a hotel. Either way, you have you have a non-Jew living in the courtyard, and the lease, and you can lease a room that you enter from the courtyard. But the non-Jew who is leasing the house was not there. V'hava maskir, but the owner who leased the land, that house, to the non-Jew that was living there, who was also not Jewish, was there. So Amru Ma'ola Megamine. So they asked a question: can we lease the land from the landlord, or do we have to lease the land from the person living there currently? Now, the Gemara makes a distinction and says, of course, if there was no way of the landlord to evict the tenant before the end of the term, then there's no question you cannot lease from him, because he has no rights at the current moment. Where he does have some rights to terminate the contract. You say since he can evict him, so you can lease the land from him for the Shabbos as well, because he's also, even though he's not the main, he doesn't have the main rights of the use of the courtyard, but in potential he has the rights to use of the courtyard. He's the owner, and therefore you can lease from him. Adilma hashtamia. What do we say? No. Currently, there's one person who has rights to the courtyard that's not Jewish, and that's the renter, not the landowner, and not the landlord. And therefore, you can't rent the space of the courtyard in regards to Eruv from the landlord, because he doesn't have the rights, even though in potential he has it, because he could evict him at some point. But right now he hasn't, and so therefore only the current owner of these rights, which is the person who's renting this apartment, is the person that can relinquish or sell their rights in the courtyard, and it doesn't help to rent from the landlord.
So you don't have to have ownership, but you do have to have, what do you call it, control over the space. You could be the sub lessee, but if you've got control over it, then you could.
Not you could. That's who you need to rent from. In other words, right. It's whoever has usage of right in the courtyard. Mm-hmm. That's what we're looking for. For this Shabbos, we're trying to unify the space of the courtyard to be a single use, a single communal use by joining in an Eruv in a joint meal. Then the non-Jew who has the rights to usage in that courtyard is going to have to lease his space to the group, to the Eruv group. Mm-hmm. That's what we're looking for. It's not about the ownership. It's not the ownership of the house. It doesn't make a difference. It's the usage rights in the courtyard. Amar lehen Rish Lakish Nisker. So Rish Lakish said, "It's a good question. We don't know the answer, but let us lease the land from the landlord, even though the renter is currently not there." When we come to our teachers in the south, Nishalem will ask them whether we did it correctly or not. And Rashi points out the reason why he was willing to be lenient and take the chance is because we've seen that for Eruv you can be lenient. It's an enactment, Oraisa. It is a private domain in any case. You could carry from the house to the courtyard and vice versa. The Chachamim enacted it since it's a shared space. It looks like or acts like a public domain, and you can be lenient in a Suffolk Chachamim like this. So make that lease, which the Chachamim enacted, and if it was wrong, it was wrong, but at least they tried. So initially, also Shaila l'Ravafis. So they came and they asked Ravafis, you did the right thing by leasing it from him because you could lease from it. These three
Could I ask a question? What would be the wording of that lease? How would it go?
Can we have rights to use your space in the courtyard on Shabbos?
That's it. Does there have to be any consideration? Is any money change hands, or it's?
So that we saw the other day that there was a question of how serious this lease is. Whether it actually you have to move furniture in. Do you have to have a shavet pruta? Right, we saw that a couple of days ago. Machlokes and halacha is that it doesn't have to be a serious. Is a schirus beria a healthy one, which means that you have to move furniture in or whatever, or is a schirus ru'ua, and then that's it. Is a schirus ru'ua. So it's really just a formality. The Gemara tells us another story of Rabbi Chanina by Yosef Rachi bar Abba and Rabasi Ikulu Pundak. They came to this hotel. The Asa Nachri Mara de Pundak b'Shabsa. They couldn't lease before Shabbos because the owner wasn't there, but the owner showed up on Shabbos. The owner of the hotel, and so now they wanted to lease from him. Rashi and Tosfos, there's two versions, but ultimately. The idea is that they had made an Eruv before Shabbos, because since the owner wasn't there, they could make a lease. They don't need to lease from him. There were just a few Jews in this hotel. And so they just made an Eruv by a joint meal, and that was sufficient. But now that a non-Jew showed up, the owner, on Shabbos, can they make a lease from him on Shabbos? Can we make a lease from him? Making the lease from the non-Jew. Is that similar to making of the Eruv, which it has to be at the onset of Shabbos? You put your bread in. Just as making the Eruv, putting in the joint meal, has to be done before Shabbos, at the onset of Shabbos. So too the lease of the space is meba'odim. Or perhaps that leasing the land is like the person relinquishing the land, which we saw earlier. If somebody forgot to put in their meal before Shabbos and join the meal, they can relinquish their rights to the courtyard land and to the others, and then the others at least can carry from their house into the street, into the courtyard, and that can be done on Shabbos. So too maybe the leasing of the land from the non-Jew could be done on Shabbos. So Rabbi Chanina by Yosef Amanisker. So Rabbi Chanina by Yosef said, "Hey, let's lease the land on Shabbos because I think it works." Ravasi Amalenisker. Ravasi said, "No, we cannot rent from him." We'll rely on the elder, and we will make that lease even on Shabbos. Asa Shaila Rabbi Yochanan. They came and they asked Rabbi Yochanan. Amalehen, he said to them, Yafa Sitam Shezachartem. You did the right thing by leasing, and now we're on Samach Vav Amar Aleph. You did the right thing by leasing, even though that it was on Shabbos. In other words, that this could be done on Shabbos, just like the relinquishing of land, of the courtyard rights that I would have, I can relinquish to the group. So too, renting the space, leasing the space from the non-Jewish landowner or renter would also be done on Shabbos. By the way, this halacha it comes up a lot, and it's not always so clear to people that when you're in a hotel for Shabbos and there are multiple people, Jews and non-Jews, renting space, in order to carry in the public sphere, there needs to be some sort of eruv made as well. Toba Nahardai. So in Nahardai, they wondered about this. Is this really true that Rabbi Yochanan said this? I mean, Rabbi Yochanan, did Rabbi Yochanan really say that you can make this lease on Shabbos? But we have Rabbi Yochanan saying that the leasing is like the making of the Eruv. And we just said that the making of the Eruv has to be done before Shabbos, so that at the onset of Shabbos, everybody has joined their meal. So too, the leasing, that's what it seems he's saying, because he says the leasing is like the meal, and not that it's like the relinquishing of the rights of your space, which can be done on Shabbos. My love, Mama Aramubadia. Wouldn't you say that Rabbi Yochanan meant that just as the leasing, sorry, just as like joining the meal, putting in a bread for the Eruv has to be done before the onset of Shabbos, so too the leasing of the land from the non-Jew has to be done before the onset of Shabbos. So Gemara says like, Mama Arav afilu b'pachas mishavar pruta avsecher b'pachas mishavar pruta. No, there are other things that he meant that they are similar. One, that just as when you make an eruv, you put in a bread. There's no minimum value of that bread. It could be less than a shava pruta's worth. As long as you put in your meal, that's going to be sufficient. So too, leasing from the non-Jew, as we saw earlier, there isn't a minimum value that you're giving that, and you could give even less than a shava pruta, and that would be an okay lease. And just like when you're giving it an eruv, it doesn't have to be that you individually put your eruv in. It could be someone from your household. It could be your hired hand. It could be a representative of yours, as we'll see that it could be. So too over here, in leasing, it doesn't have to be that you lease directly from the non-Jew. It could also be that it is the representative of the non-Jew that's leasing his land to you, or even his hired hand can lease the land to you. And just like if two courtyards are joining in an Eruv, so courtyard A has 5 inhabitants, and they are joining with courtyard B, but courtyard A already made a joint Eruv and put their Eruv into the apartment number 1, and now there's five breads in there for the Eruv of that courtyard, and now they decide let's join together with the courtyard B. So one person living in apartment number 1 can take that Eruv and bring it over to courtyard B on behalf of the entire group, and that counts as everyone joining with the next one as a representative of the entire group. So in leasing the land as well, that one could represent everyone and lease from the non-Jew on behalf of everyone. So those halachas are where Rabbi Yochanan said that the Eruv, leasing is like the making of the Eruv. But as far as whether it can be done on Shabbos or it has to be done before Shabbos, that's not what Rabbi Yochanan was referring to. Tahi bar Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar was somewhat uncomfortable with this. The word Tahi, Rashi says, means he was smelling his wine to see whether it was off or not. He was testing his palate to see whether this tastes right. That this is what Rabbi Yochanan said. Amar Rabbi Zera, Maitai the Rabbi Lazar. What's Rabbi Lazar uncomfortable here? What's he thinking about? Amar Rav Sheshes Gavra Rabbi Zera Liada Maitai the Rabbi Lazar. What someone as great as Rabbi Zera doesn't know what Rabbi Lazar is uncomfortable about? He's uncomfortable about this teaching of Shmuel, because he has a different teaching from Shmuel, so he was uncomfortable about Rabbi Yochanan's teaching and wondering about it. What Kakasha laid this Shmuel Rabbi, he has a question because Shmuel, his teacher, contemporary of Rabbi Yochanan, taught something that would seem to be different than this. The Amar Shmuel said, Kol mokem sha'isrin u'ma'arvin. Wherever they forbid each other, meaning if they don't make an eruv, if they don't join in a meal, then nobody can carry. U'ma'arvin, and they could make a joint eruv if they wanted to. Mevatlin, then they can relinquish their land on Shabbos. And we'll see in the Gemara. The Gemara is going to explain each one of these lines. Who is someone that if they don't make an eruv, it ruins the eruv for everyone else, and they could join in the eruv, and they can relinquish their land. Ma'arvin ve'enoiser. However, if they are a lower level of connection, meaning if they want, they can join in an eruv, but they don't have to. And if they didn't join in an eruv, it's also going to be okay. And one of them can make an eruv without the other. Or iser me'arvin, or if they would negate the other's eruv, but they don't, but they can't make an eruv together. Ein mevatlin, they cannot relinquish their lands on Shabbos. So kol mokem sha'isrin u'ma'arvin mevatlin. So the basic idea is that only if one would ruin the eruv for the others if they didn't join. That's where the Chacham said you can relinquish your land in place of joining, and you can relinquish it on Shabbos because you're ruining the eruv for everyone else. But if it doesn't ruin the eruv for everyone else, or you didn't have to make an eruv, you couldn't make an eruv together, so there the Chachamim did not say that you can relinquish your land to the others. So what's this case where it would forbid each other if you didn't make an eruv, and you could make an eruv if you wanted, and therefore you can relinquish a land? Kagun, Beis Chatzer Zul of Nimizu. So, Kamak Shaisim Arvim Abatlin Kagun, Beis Chatzer Zul of Nimizu. That's you have two courtyards, and one is inside the other, meaning the only way to get to the inner courtyard is through walking through the outer courtyard, sort of like a flag lot. So they have rights. The inner courtyard, which has no access to the street, only through the outer courtyard that's closer to the street. The inner courtyard inhabitants have rights to walk through the outer courtyard, and therefore they would if they didn't join in the meal and the eruv with the outer courtyard, they would prohibit the outer courtyard from having an eruv amongst itself, because they are also considered in part inhabitants of the outer courtyard because of their rights to walk through, and therefore they must join in, and they can join in because they're open to that courtyard and they're considered a part of the courtyard. And if they didn't join, they negate the eruv that the outer courtyard would have made. And therefore, if they forgot to join in before Shabbos, they can relinquish their rights to the courtyard, to the inhabitants of the courtyard, and as such, they would be able to carry on Shabbos if they had made a joint meal. Ma'arvin be'ein oisrin, ein mevatlin. If they could make an eruv, but they don't not obligated to make an eruv. So that's a case. You have two courtyards. There is an opening between them, but they both have an opening. Besides for the opening between them, they both have a separate opening to the alleyway. So they could just ignore the opening between them and the inhabitants of one courtyard can just maintain their connection to the mavu, to the alleyway, as they're opening from the courtyard, and the other alleyway, the other courtyard as well, could have its own independent entryway, and so therefore they don't have to be connected. If they want, they're allowed to make an eruv between themselves. But if they didn't, they would not prohibit each other from their eruv, and therefore they cannot relinquish rights on Shabbos. Or if they prohibit each other, but they don't make an eruv, there they can't relinquish. Where is that case? What's the case of two courtyards where they cannot make an eruv together, but they could, they could prohibit each other from carrying? Now, if you prohibit, then you would normally say if you prohibit the other, it means I'm an inhabitant in this courtyard. If I'm an inhabitant in the courtyard, I must be able to make an eruv with you. The only case that we can think of that you would not make an eruv, you cannot make an eruv, but yet you prohibit the other from carrying unless they fix it, must be my lab. Wouldn't you say that it's a non-Jew who can't make an eruv because he's not obligated in resting on Shabbos? So he can't be part of the eruv. He doesn't have Shabbos space, but we have to lease the space from him because he does have rights in the courtyard. Now, okay, so what's the case? So if he came before Shabbos, so then we'll lease the land from him. We'll rent the land from him before Shabbos. Now we turn to Samach Vavam and Beis. Elolav the Asa b'Shabbos must be that he came on Shabbos. Ukatani Isrin, and it says that it will invalidate the eruv that they made before it. The ein ma'arvin, you can't make an eruv. Ein mavatlan, and you cannot relinquish the rights either on Shabbos. So you see that you only have this relinquishing of the rights before Shabbos when you could have made the eruv and you didn't. Shema mina. So that's why he was wondering about Rabbi Yochanan, because his teacher Shmuel seemingly said that the halacha is that you cannot fix on Shabbos a non-Jew who you did not lease from before Shabbos. So Rabbi Yosef said, I never heard this teaching of Shmuel. Now, as we've said many times, Rabbi Yosef later on in life had an illness, and he had memory loss. And when he got better, his students would remind him of teachings that he had and that he had taught them, and on which specific teaching he taught them. So Abaye said, no, you did teach it to us. And it was in regards to this halacha that you taught it to us. The Amar Shmuel said, in Bitul Rishus Mechatzer Lachatzer, there is no relinquishing of your rights in your space from one courtyard to another. It's only within your courtyard that you can relinquish your rights to your courtyard co-members. But you cannot relinquish your rights to a different courtyard. Vein Bitul Rishus B'churva. And also, you cannot relinquish your rights to a ruin, to a house that's not really inhabitable. And in regards to that halacha, you said, Ki Amar Shmuel in Bitul Rishus Mechatzer Lachatzer. When did Shmuel say this halacha? That there's no relinquishing of rights from your courtyard to another courtyard. That's only where there's two separate courtyards. Each one has an individual space, an individual entrance to the alleyway, and there's also also an opening between them. And therefore, since those are really considered two independent spaces, and therefore, when you relinquish your rights, it's only to your members, to the members of your courtyard, because you're relinquishing the rights of your space in your courtyard. So you can't relinquish it to the other courtyard. Aval zulifnim izu, but where it's one courtyard inside the other courtyard, meaning like a flag lot, or essentially the only way that the inhabitants of the inner courtyard can get out to the street is through walking through the outer courtyard. So essentially that makes them one. Since the inner courtyard people, if they didn't join in the Eruv with the outer courtyard, prohibit them from making an Eruv, essentially defining them as members of the outer courtyard by virtue of their right to walk through there. And therefore, mevatlin, therefore they can relinquish their rights even to the other courtyard members, because essentially it's not another courtyard. It happens to be that there's a wall between them, and they could, in some halachas, be independent. But since they walk through and they have rights through that courtyard, and they would invalidate the outer courtyard's eruv if they don't participate, therefore they can even relinquish their rights on Shabbos. I said this in the name of Shmuel. How can that be? Shmuel said in all halachas of Eruvin, we only have the words of the Mishnah. We can't change the wording of the Mishnah. And in the Mishnah it says Anshe Chatzer, the members of a courtyard, and not members of courtyards. And so you see that only in one courtyard you can relinquish your rights, and not to the members of the other courtyard. This is Rav Yosef's question, that since Shmuel said that we always have to that the halacha is always in Eruvin in regards to making the Eruvin, relinquishing rights, etc., it's the wording of the Mishnah. Well, then the Mishnah says, Rav Yosef says, the Mishnah says that Anshe Chatzer, the members of a courtyard, singular, must be that only within one courtyard can you relinquish rights, and not Chatzeros, not members of different courtyards. And over here you're telling me that the inner courtyard can relinquish its rights in the outer courtyard. Amar Leis, Abai responded, Ki Amrislan, Ein Lanu Eruvin, Ela Kaloshim Mishnasenu. When you taught us that halach of Shmuel, that Shmuel said that it's always the language of the Mishnah. You said it about a different matter. You said about this. That in regards to alleyways, the alleyways have the same halacha to a courtyard as a courtyard has to a house. Just as with the house, you have to join in all the houses of the courtyard. As members of the courtyard have to join in a meal, and then they can carry from the house to the courtyard and from the courtyard to the house. So too, all courtyards that open to an alleyway have the same halacha. The courtyard of the members of the alleyway and as it relates to the courtyards are the same as the courtyards relate to the houses. And idea is that you need, just as you need two houses in a courtyard, you need two courtyards in a street in order for it to be defined as such. Gufa. So now let's analyze the body of the statement that Shmuel said. Amar Shmuel, ein bitul rishus mechatza lachatza ve'ein bitul rishus bechurva. You cannot relinquish your rights within a courtyard to another courtyard, to members of another courtyard, and you can't relinquish your rights to a ruin. However, Rabbi Yochanan says, Yesh bitul rishus mechatza lachatza, you could relinquish your rights within your courtyard to members of another courtyard, and you can relinquish it to them if there's a joint eruv. And you can relinquish your rights to a ruin. That's and the idea of relinquishing your rights in a ruin would be in a case where between the two houses there's your house and your neighbor's house, there's a ruin, and both essentially have access to usage of the now empty home or an empty house that's falling apart between the two houses. And this, you can relinquish your rights so that the other, if you didn't make an eruv, since two people have access to it, if you didn't make an eruv, you can relinquish your rights to the other, and that way they, at least they can use it. Yeah. Utzricha. And we needed Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel to argue about both of these matters. The Iyashmina Mechatzer Chatzer, if we had only learned the machlokas between in regards to relinquishing your rights in one courtyard to another courtyard, V'haka Amar Shmuel, that's where Shmuel says that you cannot relinquish your rights within your courtyard to another courtyard. Mishum tashmisha l'chud v'hatashmisha l'chud, because each usage is separate. Your courtyard's usage is for the members of your courtyard, and as such, you can relinquish your rights to them because that's their use. That's where you have a shared usage, and you're relinquishing your rights and saying, "I'm not going to use my space. You can have my space. You, the group of Eruv, can have my space." But to another courtyard, that's a separate usage space. But in the ruin, where both of them would have rights to use the space as one, maybe Shmuel would agree to Rabbi Yochanan and say that you do have rights to relinquish your space to your neighbor within the ruin, because after all, it is a shared space. And if we had only said it in regards to the ruin, perhaps maybe only the Rabbi Yochanan said that you have a right to relinquish on Shabbos and to your neighbor, even though that it's not really a courtyard. But maybe by two separate courtyards where there are separate usages, perhaps you do not have rights to you cannot relinquish the rights within your courtyard to the members of the next courtyard. Therefore, we need Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan to disagree about both of these matters, and that would affect also Rabbi Yochanan's previous halacha in regards to this idea of when you only when something prohibits before Shabbos, you can relinquish on Shabbos, and about a non-Jew. This that Shmuel said, you cannot relinquish your rights from your courtyard to the members of another courtyard. That's only two independent courtyards that each have a separate opening to the alleyway, and there just happens to be an opening between the courtyards as well, and therefore, if they want, they can join in the Eruv, and if they don't want, they don't have to join in the Eruv. But if it's an inner courtyard connected to the outer courtyard, and that's the only access the inner courtyard has to the alleyway, since the inner courtyard must participate in the outer courtyard's Eruv in order for the outer courtyard's Eruv to be valid, on account of they're also in some way considered inhabitants of the outer courtyard because they have the right of way to walk through there. Therefore, they must participate in the Eruv. And since if they don't, it invalidates the outer courtyard's Eruv, they have a right to relinquish their usage of space to the outer courtyard members. After all, they are essentially considered one in that way. Rav Amar, however, Rav says, however, Rav says that's not always the case. Sometimes it's true that they do have the right, they can relinquish their rights, and sometimes they cannot. And Rav is going to make a distinction here of where the Eruv is placed in this courtyard. The inner courtyard members participating with the outer courtyard. So you have an inner courtyard, the outer courtyard. The members in the inner courtyard, to get to the alleyway, have to walk through the outer courtyard's walkway, and the Eruv is placed in the outer courtyard. And one of the members or the members of the inner courtyard forgot to join in, or vice versa. A member of the outer courtyard forgot to join in, but the Eruv is in the outer courtyard. Nasno Eruv Ketza. So what's the scenario? Nasno Eruvan Bechitzayna. They put their Eruv in the outer courtyard. V'shachach echad and one person forgot to join in the Eruv, bein min apnimis, bein min achitzona, whether it's from the inner courtyard or from the outer courtyard. V'lo irev. And he didn't join in the Eruv that is in the outer courtyard. Shtein asuras. Both courtyards may not carry at this point. And therefore the relinquishing of his rights in the space is not going to work. And the Gemara later is going to explain the reasoning why that doesn't work. However, if Nasno Eruvan, if they put their Eruv in the inner courtyard, so everybody joined in the meal from the outer courtyard and the members of the inner courtyard, and they put their meal in one of the houses in the inner courtyard. But a single member of the inner courtyard didn't join in the Eruv. Nasnu Eruvam b'pnimis. They put the Eruv in the inner courtyard. V'shachach echem min ha'pnimis. And someone from the inner courtyard forgot to join in the Eruv. V'lo irev shtein asuras. Here too, both courtyards cannot carry, and relinquishing the rights will not help. However, where does it help that there could be relinquishing of the rights to the other courtyard? In this case, where the Eruv is in the inner courtyard, and all the members of the inner courtyard joined in the Eruv. However, one of the members of the outer courtyard didn't join in the Eruv. So the members of the inner courtyard are allowed to carry because everyone in the inner courtyard has the Eruv. The Eruv is within the inner courtyard, and everybody in the inner courtyard joined in the Eruv. And the outer courtyard is going to be not allowed to carry. And this is going to work because the member who did not join in the Eruv relinquished his rights to the rest of the courtyard. So the Gemara is going to explain. All right. One of the outer courtyard's members forgot to join in the Eruv. The inner is going to be permissible, and the outer one's going to be prohibited. The inner one's permissible because the Eruv is in their space, and the outer one's going to be prohibited because there's a member in their courtyard that didn't join in the Eruv. In the first case that we had, they all put their Eruv in the outer courtyard, and one member, regardless of whether from the inner courtyard or the outer courtyard, forgot to join in the Eruv. Why doesn't it work that he can relinquish his space? Haibar Pnimis, the member of the inner courtyard, Lamani Vatil, who is he relinquishing his rights to within his courtyard? Livatil Abnei Pnimis, is he only relinquishing the rights to within his own courtyard, in the inner courtyard, in the flag lot? Leisa Le'Ruvai Gabayim, his Eruv is not actually within the inner courtyard. So he's relinquishing rights to people that essentially don't live in that courtyard anymore. They've moved the Eruv into the other courtyard. So it can't be independent of the outer courtyard. The Eruv, the meal, is in the outer courtyard, so they can't have their own space. And so therefore, the outer courtyard, which not everybody joined into, is going to prohibit the inner courtyard because since they have the right to walk through there, they're prohibited in their own space. Meaning within the outer courtyard. So it'll prohibit even the inner courtyard's use. The Eruv is not there. And so if they want to separate themselves now, the inner courtyard want to say, you know what, we've made our Eruv by ourselves. You guys are separate from us, and our Eruv member, our courtyard member, relinquishes rights to us, and now we are an independent space, but the Eruv is not in our space, so we can't make the Eruv. The inner courtyard, since the outer courtyard has the Eruv, it's not going to be valid. Let the outer courtyards relinquish their rights to the inner courtyard. Let him relinquish his rights to the outer courtyard. No, that can't work either, because you cannot relinquish your rights from one courtyard to the other. And then he says, okay, so what happens if it was an outer courtyard person who forgot to join in? And if he was in the outer courtyard, who is he going to relinquish to? Is he relinquishing only to the inner courtyard? There's the inner courtyard that's still prohibited to them, and since they are prohibited, they would invalidate the Eruv of the outside courtyard. And if he's going to relinquish his rights to the inner courtyard, that too wouldn't work. You cannot relinquish your right from one courtyard to the other. Essentially, and we're going to have to stop here and go and analyze the rest of the statements of Shmuel tomorrow. Essentially what we have is when the Eruv is in the outer courtyard, the inner courtyard must be connected with the outer courtyard because they have to walk through there. They cannot independently make their Eruv because, after all, the Eruv is in the outer courtyard, and you cannot relinquish to the other courtyard because you can't relinquish from one courtyard to the other, and you can't relinquish only to your own to your own courtyard. The inner people can't separate themselves, and the outer courtyard, the inner courtyard has a right to walk through, so they cannot separate themselves. That's the basis of the first two halachas. And tomorrow, Bez Hashem, will continue with Shmuel's halacha of this separation.